following contains adult language and poorly impersonated celebrity voices and parodies. Listener discretion is advised.
Adam,
All right.
John.
tell the people who we're staring at today. Would you?
Sure. Today we have an old school San Franciscan, friend of the doctor and Magistrate Barton. Please welcome Diego D. to the show. He's going to talk to us a little bit about old school Church of Satan and his time there, and we're going to have a good time.
Awesome.
All right.
Welcome, Diego.
Thanks for being here.
Oh,
Yeah,
pleasure.
we-
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
We appreciate any looks at history of the Church of Satan. Definitely.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
glad to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to believe that it goes back decades. I think first time I saw the doctor. See, I grew up in San Francisco, so Dr. LaVey was a well-known person in the news, the newspapers, and so forth. And I remember the first time he really got my attention was when he was on the Joe Pine Show. If you remember that show.
Yeah.
The episode is still on YouTube, I noticed.
Yeah.
And I thought, and then there he was in his robe and his jewelry, and he was pretty much holding his own with Joe Pine, who was known to be very caustic. He was one of the first of the shock jocks, if you will.
Yeah.
And and then I remember in the local paper, he used to advertise that every Wednesday and Thursday at 8 o'clock he would give lessons and on different subjects, anywhere from the occult, spiritualism, to sideshows, to fortune telling, all kinds of things. And I remember the first time I attended was a Wednesday night, and it was on. He was talking about spirits, ghosts, and spiritualism, mediums, and all that. And I can remember going there to the address on California Street. And then, he just set up the living room like a little, of course, that's where he had his rituals, but they had about 50 folding chairs there. And you paid $2.50 to attend. And then I remember he talked about various subjects. And afterwards, I lingered and said hello to him and said I enjoyed him on the Joe Pine Show. And I told him I did magic and I was more interested in learning more about mentalism. And it's interesting because Dr. LaVey, he was the first person who said, well, if you're interested in mentalism, the first thing you should do is get a catalog from Nelson Enterprises from Columbus, Ohio. They're the main dealers in anything mind readers, psychics, mediums need to do their stuff. And so I had seen the catalogs advertised in different magic periodicals, but Dr. LaVey was the first one to say, this is what you got to do. This is where you start. And so Robert Nelson had Robert Nelson Enterprises. He published many different books on how to do different types of mind reading, psychic, and spiritualistic phenomena. And he did that for almost 50 years. It's hard most people don't realize much of the phenomena that came out of seance rooms actually originated from an office in Columbus, Ohio. And so what happened was then, I remember I was talking about different types of phenomena, and he said something very interesting. I said, I think maybe when I perform, I want to do something that'll really just blow him away. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, often the more subtle phenomena is far more convincing.
Yeah.
And then, so then I remember occasionally I'd go to other classes. He did ones on fortune telling. The one that really got me his attention, he did one called on the class was the sideshow, the passing of an America genre. And then he talked about his own experiences in carnivals and circuses. He talked about the different types of sideshows and so forth, which was always an interesting subject of my own. I was always interested in. And so we talked more, and sometimes afterwards, after his classes, we talked for a few minutes about magic or magicians and different magicians and mentalists he had seen. The famous comedy magic duo, Milo and Rogers, they had stayed with him nearby, I think in the same apartment building. Anton LaVey, I think, used to live out in the area called the Sutro Baths area in San Francisco. Yeah. And Milo Rogers had, I think, an apartment in the same building. And so we talked, and then let's see, fast forward a year or two later, I'm out of high school, and my job, I was totally into magic. I wanted to start my career doing magic, performing magic, and I thought as a great place to start would be in the circus or in a sideshow. And I remember I read an ad in the amusement business, the Outdoor Weekly at the time said sideshow help wanted, and my first job was at a sideshow and I opened when I was playing the rodeo at Salinas, California. And so I started doing magic, performing, and then I also later became the inside talker, the person who does the introduction and all the different acts. Who does the electric act, the blade box, or will introduce CeeLo the Seal Boy, or Dickie the Penguin Boy, and all the others.
Right.
And this was a different era. This was when these were real human oddities. And it's interesting, back then, if you wanted to book a sideshow, the fair managers would ask, "Are these real freaks?" And now, if you wanted to book a sideshow, they'd ask, "You don't have any freaks, do you?"
Right.
So it's a different era.
Yeah.
Totally.
So it's interesting because in the early 70s, the state of Florida, of all places, tried to pass a law banning sideshows or the people being exhibited showing their so-called deformities. And CeeLo the Seal Boy and others actually went to court saying that this was the way they made their living. This is the way, and how dare anyone say how they cannot make a living by utilizing what was their most important assets. And so anyway, but that was a different time. So anyway, I performed, later became the outside talker, the person who stood outside, bringing people into the show. And interesting, I remember playing, must have been a Santa Maria County Fair, and there was a showman, Jack Waller, who was a great performer and pitchman, great Svengali pitchman and mouse pitchman, and he had a single show called Rosemary's Baby. And you paid your 50 cents, you went inside, and you'd see this little shrunken, like little imp, little devil about this inch, but above it was a full-grown man's head. And he was talking to you, but there was nothing underneath it. All you saw was this little impish 6-foot-high body, and here was this grown man on top of it, totally, and you couldn't. There was no body, you couldn't see anything. If you're familiar with sideshow illusions like the Headless Woman and so forth, you'll know how that's done. But he had this, and people would come in and he'd talk and say a few things, and there was a lot of artifacts related to Satanism inside the tent. And I asked Jack, "Where'd you get that?" He said, "Oh, well, Anton let me have them." So he knew Anton LaVey pretty well, and then so he'd stop by and help him frame the show, and so Jack and I was good friends with Jack Waller for the next 20 years until he passed away. And interesting because I was always interested in magic, mentalism, and the occult, and it all seemed all wrapped in together: religion, the occult, magic, mysticism. It all seemed connected. And remember, let's say into the 90s, I began performing. I worked in television production for a long time, and I decided to start performing full time myself. And I was doing exclusively mentalism and psychic magic. And then as I got more interested, I thought, Robert Nelson and his company is really a fascinating story that should be told. And I began doing more research, and I thought, why not go back to the source, the person who first told you? You pick up a Nelson catalog. And I remember this would have been 1997, I think. I wrote some letters, and then eventually I didn't get. They said, well, I didn't get a no, but they said, well, Dr. LaVey is busy, blah blah blah. And then I just would occasionally send an article or a note or just something, just saying, expressing my interest. And I'll never forget, I was in Chicago, and I got a message on my phone, and Blanche Barton, she said, "Dr. LaVey, please call. Dr. LaVey would like to set up an appointment with you." And then she said, "And by the way, we appreciate your gentle persistence." So I tried to always be there, but not be a nudge either. So anyway, so a month later, they set up an appointment at midnight, and then I went to, this would have been 1997, and so knocked on, so went to the gate. If you've ever been there, remember it had a metal gate that you had to be buzzed through. And right there at midnight, and was welcomed, and the place was exactly like I remember. The ritual room with the red ceiling and the black walls, was it, or was it red walls and black ceiling? I can't recall. You remember? Okay.
Black walls, red ceiling.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so everything like the coffin, where the upright coffin that he used to use when he was doing his show in a North Beach nightclub that Susan Atkins used to emerge from, and then of course the bed and nails and everything. It seemed like time had stopped. Right? It seemed very much like how I remembered it. And then first Blanche warmly welcomed me, had me have a seat. In a few minutes, Dr. LaVey came in. And blatantly, it was just like two carnies just sitting behind the cookhouse cutting up jackpots. We just had a great time, just talking about the old days, what I remember about the Church of Satan and what he remembered. We talked about the different controversies, and then we talked about circuses, carnivals, magic, mentalism. And interesting, I remember I told him just a few months earlier I had seen Uri Geller perform or lecture in a hotel ballroom. And Uri Geller, who's a master, you have not really lived until you've seen 1,000 people in a hotel ballroom like this, absolutely transfixed as he makes a key bend a quarter of an inch. Now, this was a person who, as someone said, less is more. And as I explained that to him, said that to Dr. LaVey, I said, you know what? It reminds me of what you told me over 20 years ago, that the more subtle phenomena is far more convincing. And he smiled knowingly. He says, I can see it in their eyes. And he gestured over to the altar. I can see it. Then thinking, did that skull move or not? Did I really see that? And so it was off. So we talked about mentalism. We talked about all kinds of subjects. And it was just an amazing conversation. And it's interesting because we got to it was about almost dawn was approaching. Oh, and so Blanche was there. And then she said, well, would you like to have a cup of coffee? Why don't we go into the kitchen? And as some of you may know, in the kitchen, he had set up an organ, several keyboards, and so forth. Yeah. And also one thing, if you remember, if you lived in San Francisco, you're used to in the morning hearing the foghorns from the tugboats. So we're hearing those. And their son, Xerxes, he would have been, I don't know, he would have been 5 or 6 years old, I don't know. And it's interesting because he was playing, he had toy Ferris wheels and merry-go-rounds, like little carnival rides he was playing with on the kitchen table. And I remember Dr. LaVey played a couple of songs, and he said, is there anything, a particular composer you like? And I said, hey, can you play anything by Harry Warren? And suddenly his eyes lit up, and he started playing Quarter to Three that Harry Warren had written, that Al Jolson had sang. It was a popular song Al Jolson did. And so he did a couple other songs and a few others. And then suddenly, how did it start? Well, can't remember what happened, but then suddenly his shoulders came back, and then he started playing God Bless America, a rousing rendition with such intensity and such showmanship. And when he finished, I'll never forget that. Me, Blanche, and Xerxes are at our feet, giving the high priest of Satan a standing ovation as he shakes the San Francisco neighborhood to its foundations as he's playing this crescendo of God Bless America.
Awesome.
That is cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you were hanging out and just kind of cutting it up with the doctor, and you were talking about the old Church of Satan. I mean, the Church of Satan back then is what I mean.
Right.
What are some of the things that you guys were talking about back then? Like what sort of things happened?
Yeah, for example, when he interesting because I had brought with me the old handouts. I'm a collector. I'm a person who does not let go like anything away. So I have boxes and tons of stuff. And so I actually had the old handouts that they had given back then. And Blanche and the doctor said, we haven't had copies of these for years. And so I gladly let them make copies of those. And then I remember, this would have been around 1970 when the doctor...
You have this?
Yeah. Let's see here. I don't know if I have that. Satanic Mass. I don't think I have that.
The old order forms? Okay.
I don't have that one. The ones I have, they were on different colored paper, green, red, purple, and they were mimeographed, if anyone remembers what a mimeograph machine was. And
absolutely not.
Okay. And
they were referred to as the rainbow pages, weren't they? I heard somebody told me they were referred to as the rainbow pages.
That I don't know, because some they would give either the tenets of the Church of Satan, and it would also give information about what they do. And I always remember the tenet. I thought it was so true. He says, Satan is the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept it in business all these years. And I remember, interesting, this would have been, 1970, the documentary Santana, the Devil's Mask came out. And it premiered, the world premiere was at a little theater called the Times Theater in the North Beach area. This probably would have been on Broadway, just off where, if you remember the old North Beach area where the nightclubs were. And so they advertised the first 100 people that attend will be given a free copy of the Satanic Bible, which has just been published. And I was number 3 in line. And so if you pay, I think that whatever it was $2 or $3, you paid your money, and they handed you a copy of a Satanic Bible, which I still have. And then fast forward when I'm back in 1997, I'm visiting Dr. LaVey and Blanche Barton. I showed it to them, and it says, this is the first edition of the Satanic Bible in any form. And Blanche was suitably impressed. And I remember I asked Dr. LaVey to autograph this and the other books I had by him. And he says, we don't have copies in this good condition, because mine were in pristine condition. And so he was very impressed by that. And I remember, let's see here, at the Times I remember the Times Theater. And it was just a theater. Some people, depending on your point of view, it was either an art house or a grind house. And it played there for a while. I remember even back then, Dr. LaVey was kind of knocking. He said, well, when the movie was made, we had a hokey Madison Avenue approach to our church. now we're getting away from that. And let's see here. We talked about...
Some of the pseudos today need to hear that, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We did talk about various people he had conflicts with. I remember we talked about Mike Warnke and Isaac Bonovitz. And, and other people who come and gone, and it was just very interesting. Listen, Joe Pine, and I remember we talked about he was on a TV show called Man Trap. I don't know if you remember that. It was hosted by Alan Hamill, who's known for being married to what's her name from Three's Company, the blonde from Three's Company. Anyway.
Suzanne Summers.
Thank you. Okay, so anyway, this was one of back then in the 60s and 70s. Alan Hamill hosted a number of talk shows and game shows, and Man Trap was the idea was that 3 women panelists would gang up. They'd have a male guest on talk about something. These 3 women would go after him and try to nail him. And it was taped in Canada, and I remember it was taped in Canada. Dr. LaVey was there on one episode. And I can't remember who all was there, but I remember Ann Miller, the famous dancer from movies, was one of the panelists. And it was a typical thing, they're trying to tell him what a male chauvinist pig, blah, 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 he is. And of course, it was taped in Canada because it was much cheaper there. But of course, on the plane back to LA, everyone was just having drinks and enjoying themselves.
Awesome. Do you have a copy of that?
I have not seen. I've looked on YouTube. I don't know if I've even seen any episodes of Man
I've
Trap.
never seen that one.
I don't even know if it lasted a full season. This would have been like 70, 71. So I don't know if it was syndicated or network, but it was hosted by Alan Hamill. And again, I don't know who produced it at the time.
It'd be
something to look for.
Now, when you were talking about the different classes that the doctor held in his house, because obviously it was before internet and that.
Right.
How did you find out about these things? How did you find out about different classes and stuff?
Oh, well, they were listed in the San Francisco Chronicle. The Chronicle would have listings in their Sunday supplement paper. Usually, I think they were either very cheap or free, where it was either for classes or meetings of different organizations and so forth. It was just a simple listing, and then it was listed those classes. And I think it used to be on Saturday afternoons. That's when he gave his lessons on Satanism. I think to be a member of the church, you had to attend these 3 meetings that were consecutive. They were constantly going over each week. So I think you had to attend these 3 sessions before you became a member.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh.
Yeah, they should do that today.
Awesome.
It's impressive. That's really cool that you got to spend some time with them. On more than one occasion and things like that.
Well,
so
go ahead.
Oh, you were there the day after the demolition of the Black House.
Yes, I was visiting in San Francisco, visiting family. I just come up from LA and I was visiting family, and then I looked up. I was watching the news, and then the newsman said an iconic structure has been demolished today. The Black House of the Church of Satan was demolished for blah 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 reasons. I can remember after Dr. LaVey passed away, Blanche trying to get them raise the money to try to buy it. I sent her $100 and to see what she could do, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way. And so, because I remember she was trying to salvage that, but I remember going back. The newscast said place had been torn down, and I said, "Oh, I got to go." So the next morning or early afternoon, went there to address on California Street, and there was the the place had been leveled. And as you can imagine, because you know San Francisco, all the houses and buildings are right up against each other.
Yeah.
So suddenly it's all these houses, and suddenly here's this blank space between, and nothing but torn up lumber and rocks and bricks. And so I asked it looked like they were taking a break or maybe around their lunch, and I asked the contractor, would it be all right if I picked up a few things off the ground? And I thought maybe some of the red and black wood from the structure might be good to have. He said, sure, just be careful. So I was picking some things up, and then he said, and I picked up a couple of boards, and then I took up a couple of pieces of brick because, excuse me, you might recall the stairs were made of brick. In San Francisco, it's very common to use red brick for either sidewalks or for stairs.
Yeah.
And then just then, the contractor began he seemed to get into this. And he seemed to be, I did ask the contractor, has anyone else come looking for any artifacts or anything at the site? He goes, no, you're the first one. He said, yesterday there were some news trucks, but you're the first person actually trying to find anything, look for anything, which was a little surprising to me, actually. And and so what happened was, the contractor's kind of, he gets kind of, he finds this amusing. And he says, you know what? He sees me with these bricks. He says, you know what? I had to take the altar apart before I could tear up the floor. Would you like one of the stones from the altar? I said, sure. So he goes way in the back, and he takes, and this contractor, he's 300 pounds all muscle, and he hands me this stone. I go, oh. And so it's a stone, a white stone. And, I'm thinking, gee, Susan Atkins could have been cleaning naked on this. Who knows?
So, right?
Nice.
So he gives me that.
Did you smell it?
Pardon me?
Did you smell it?
I thought this was a family show. Come on.
No, not at all.
So anyway, and then he's enjoying all this, and then he says, you know what? How would you like the front door key to the Church of Satan?
Oh, wow.
And I said, sure. And I have a photo taken of it, and there it is. Because he had no need for this key, because obviously there was no door and no building. And so among the items I have were the different pieces of wood from the structure. Am I holding it right? Do you see it?
Yeah. I just need that temporarily so I can make a mold of it and make pendants out of it.
Okay. Very good.
I'm always thinking, yeah.
Absolutely. And then
Can you trace it and get Adam send Adam the tracing of it? I can.
Oh, okay. Here we are. And so I have the stone from the altar and the front door key to the Church of Satan. Have any of you ever been to the Black House?
No.
Okay, because it used to be.
Well, go ahead.
If you see it in some documentaries, what I was hoping was to find there was a little red sign underneath the doorbell that said, "Please do not ring unless you have an appointment." And I looked futilely for that, but I'll settle for the front door key to the Church of Satan.
Yeah.
And so he gave me the boards, and I did take one of the boards and I cut them up, and I went to a lumber shop and cut it up into 19 pieces. And I sent a number to different people who I thought might appreciate it.
I never got it. Diego never got it. You got to send me another one.
Say it again?
I never got it, so you got to send me another one.
Okay. I just recently moved. I'm sure I still have a few packed away, so I'll see if I can get one for you. I was surprised one showed up on eBay somewhere. I never intended to sell that. I didn't. So, but who knows?
Yeah.
I can't get rid of stuff like that. I just.
But so I don't know who was selling on eBay, but because I gave away about half a dozen, I think, to people who I knew would appreciate it or specifically asked for it. In fact, is what I did after I wrote up I put up a certificate of authenticity for each one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So if you remember Nick Bugas,
yeah, photographer.
I sent him one, and
was he a photographer.
Pardon me?
Was he a photographer? Or am I thinking
he was. He's done many things. He was the producer of Speak of the Devil.
Right.
Comic books, music, jack of all trades.
Okay.
Definitely.
Interesting, that album, Speak of the Devil, it has at least one Harry Warren song in it, I remember. And so, of course. Anyway, so again, like I said, I've given a number of these to the people who I thought might be interested. I had one, which I gave to a good friend, the late David Alexander. It was a board with the hinges. I thought, now we have Hell's Hinges. So,
wow.
but so that's now with his widow in Chicago. But I'll tell you one thing, that night I spent with Dr. LaVey was one of the most amazing, fascinating times, just talking about old times, talking about the early days of the Church of Satan, how things evolved, and what he was up, what his different attitudes. We talked a lot about, it's interesting because the movie Nightmare Alley and the book Nightmare Alley, about someone who starts doing magic, then gets involved in doing different types of religious, occult magic, and all this through carnivals and sideshows. It looked like, with Dr. LaVey, it looked like a case of art imitating life or vice versa. And so I remember it seemed to me like I was doing the same thing. I started in the sideshow doing magic. I eventually started doing mentalism, and I knew various people in different forms of religious endeavors, occult, evangelistic, and otherwise. And I remember talking to a good friend, Dallas Turner, and who had been on all sides of the fence. And we were trying to find out. We often would have debates on who had the most loonies or who had the most crooks on which side, the occult side or the Christian side. And like anything, it just depends on the individual. I remember Dallas would say some of the finest people he knew were Christians, but it was all the bozos that turned them away from it. And likewise, he'd be in the occult world. He'd found some very good people, and other people would just turn them away from that too.
Sure. Yeah.
Wow.
It's true.
Your name isn't secretly Stanton, is it?
Pardon me?
Your name isn't secretly Stanton, is it?
No, but I have used that as an alias sometimes. Again, the whole point that Dr. LaVey names his daughter Zena, and she has a son named Stanton. That is not coincidence.
Right.
In fact, that's a good point. We just prior to meeting Dr. LaVey, I'd sent him a copy of the final shooting script to Nightmare Alley. And he found that, and we found it interesting talking about both how it changed, it was different from the book, and also the different changes. You can see at the last. Any of you ever seen the movie Nightmare Alley?
I've seen it.
No, I just put it on my notes here to check out.
Yes,
actually.
definitely. You must see it.
Okay. Well, in the movie, originally the script is going to end on a very sad note, basically, where Stanton Carlisle, played by Tyrone Power, basically hits total rock bottom. This is where he's playing a geek in a carnival, biting the heads off chickens. And that's where the script ends, where basically he agrees to do this. And you could just see in the background Daryl Zanuck saying, "What are they doing? We do Betty Grable musicals here. We need a happy ending to this." So you can see that he tacks on an ending where the Molly, his wife, finds him. She just so happens to be at the carnival at the time, and she finds him, and she says, "Okay, well, I'll take care of you." And and they walk off into the moonlight, and there's hope of redemption, supposedly. And so we talked about, of course, we're talking about in the 40s, and both Daryl Zanuck and the Hayes office generally didn't like unhappy, sordid endings like the book had.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. We talked extensively about Gresham. You notice in the book, I think his second book, among the people he dedicates it to, is William Lindsay Gresham.
Wow.
Man.
Very cool.
What a time to be alive, huh?
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
But it was interesting because talking to Dr. LaVey, you just, like I say, as we say in the carnival business, there were the people you knew who were with it and for it. And Dr. LaVey was definitely with it and for it. And you just, as someone who just had a very good inner understanding of what was going on, and very understanding of people, patterns, and he had seen every type of the occult from every angle you could. He had seen the life from so many different angles. And so it was really fascinating to see his impressions and his take on different things here. I'll always treasure that moment, those few hours. And it was hard to believe it was like 6 hours from midnight to dawn, just talking constantly with the doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, our current high priest, Magus Peter Gilmore, he's the same way. I mean, he's pretty much the quintessential leader for the church because he emulates, I don't know if he's trying to emulate LaVey, but he's naturally that way where, you can go to him for guidance. You can go to him to just talk about a film or a musical score or something. And he's so very knowledgeable about almost everything that, what he's going to say to you or bestow on you is just, it's gold, It's really cool like that. I love it.
What's interesting is, Dr. LaVey was really very much a lover of good music, and emphasis good music. And the great composers, the Tin Pan Alley era, And I remember one time, I don't know why we were talking, and somehow the name Tiny Tim came up.
Oh, yeah.
And Dr. LaVey actually, what people some people may not recall, that Tiny Tim recorded a number of albums of Tin Pan Alley songs. And I remember him singing Tin Pan Alley era songs from like 1910 to 1920 on different talk shows. And I remember, and Dr. LaVey said, you know what? No one channeled that era better than Tiny Tim. Because basically he recognized Tiny Tim had the same love for that music that Dr. LaVey did. And it was interesting, just again, the fact that you could just name a composer, Harry Warren, Berlin, Al Dubin, and so forth here, and he could just pick up on it. And very much, he was very much trying to stem the tide to the onslaught of what, quote, music is today.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Music with feeling, for sure. Music that's not computerized. Music that's made by people.
And lyrics, melodies, and
Yeah.
such things like that.
Oh yeah, that's out the window now. Yeah.
Oh.
No, it's still out there. You just have
Even musical talent is done by a computer. You know, they don't even have to sing on key anymore. It's just the computer will fix that.
Do you believe in life? All right, anyway, that's great. Diego, I don't know what else we could talk about. I mean, without you telling us every little bit of the conversation that you had. But we want to thank you for coming on. I mean,
My pleasure.
This
Really,
is very,
really
very
amazing stuff.
interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Ben, you've been a pleasure to talk to.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
No, actually, I appreciate this because actually these stories I've sort of kept under my hat for a long time. I really haven't shared it in this. I can't think of a better venue than this
Me
podcast.
neither.
So I really appreciate you inviting me and being able to record this for people who might find it of interest. Thank you.
Oh yeah,
Thanks,
definitely.
thank
definitely.
you.
It's so important that we document this kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah. Nobody
Much
knows about it,
appreciated.
you know, and it's
Much
really
appreciated.
interesting stuff. And there's a lot of people that are very interested in it.
Mhm.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys. Till next time. Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Diego, you didn't say Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
He's like,
Graham Brush. Hail.
Hang loose.
Hang loose, yeah.
I don't.